Oh, good. Testing, testing. While we're waiting, we're going to have the Gabriel Ayala give you some music. He is the 2011 Musician of the Year of the NAMMYs. So he's honoring, let's give him a round of applause. He's also going to be the master of ceremonies for our powwow this weekend. And he has a few CDs left, award-winning CDs for those of you that are guitar people. Gabriel Ayala.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I tomache in chocotesia. I antaiwa ta chivo I tom leono kime muito an chocotesia. Yo sim chinyao en po Gabriel Yalatea en po en Pascua Yaki po in Tucson, Arizona po en Leosim chocotesia. I'd like to first of all start off by thanking the Creator for the breath of life that we were all granted this morning, something we take it for granted of. And as a Native person, we're always taught to greet that sun in the morning, feel that warmth that we once felt when we were a child. So again, I thank the Creator for allowing me to be here, travel all the way from the desert to see this color that they call green up here. Kind of still in shock. We have shades of brown, that's about it. My name is Gabriel Ayala. I come from the Basquayaki tribe in Tucson. We call it Chukshan, and Chukshan for us means black dirt. It's where we come from as a people. And we call ourselves Yoeme. We call ourselves desert people. And it's such an honor to be here. I'd like to thank my relative here, Dr. Cornell P. Wordy, for inviting me to be a part of such a prestigious event of honoring our relative this evening, to be able to showcase all his talents, as what he's done for Indian country and his communities. As he said, I'm the current Native American Artist of the Year, and I'm very honored to be showcasing my talent this evening with you all. And I do hope you all come to the powwow this weekend, and you'll hear some good jokes, and you'll hear some bad jokes and stuff in between, stories from where I come from and teachings. So again, I'd like to thank you all. If you are interested in the CD, I do have a couple of CDs, and I will just play a very quick piece for you to close it off, and then we'll get to the reason why we're all here. So again, thank you so much. Chocotesia.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the microphone down, but just like Gabe said, he's going to position himself over here in case you would like his award-winning CD. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel, and for sharing your beautiful music with us, and also for blessing us with your presence. My name is Paulette Watanabe, and I am the Executive Director of Diversity and Multicultural Student Services here at Portland State. And I have the honor and pleasure of working with our 3 cultural centers here on campus our Native American Student and Community Center being one of them. So before we get started, may I ask all of you who have cell phones to silence your cell phones so you won't embarrass yourself. Also, the restrooms for the ladies are to your left as you leave the room. For the gentlemen, it's to your right. So welcome to tonight's evening with Walter Echohawk. On behalf of the Advisory Board of the Native American Student and Community Center, I would like to be the first to thank you for attending this event. This is the first of 3 events that marks the 10th anniversary of the opening of the Native Center. Yes, it's been almost 10 years. Many of you attended that beautiful celebration. And just as our groundbreaking ceremony took place in the spring of 2003, tonight's event breaks ground for the board's plan to raise funds for scholarships for Native students and support cultural and educational programming in the center. In October, you will be invited to the second event, just about the time that the foundation of the center was poured in the fall of 2003. Then in October of 2013, we will be holding a big celebration of our 10th year anniversary. Please join us for these events and others that take place in the center. For tonight, I would especially like to thank our sponsors for their generous support. Please join me in showing your appreciation to Lewis and Clark Law School, the PSU Department of Anthropology, the PSU Speakers Board, and Multicultural Center. Both of these 2 sponsors, the Speakers Board and the Multicultural Center, are funded with student fees. And we're delighted that students are making an investment in furthering our cultural and educational programming. And lastly, I'd like to express my appreciation to the Advisory Board for planning and hosting tonight's program. Special kudos to our community board member, Karma Corcoran. She's the Indian Law Program Coordinator at Lewis and Clark Law School. Julie Smith, the Director of University Communications here at PSU, and our incredibly talented Rachel Cushman, our Native American Center Specialist. So I know that you'll enjoy the evening, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Paulette, for a warm welcome. I'd also like to thank Gabriel Ayala for his beautiful classical guitars. My first person I'm going to introduce to you is Sky Hopinka. Sky is a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, and he is an amazing, amazing student, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about his experiences here at PSU. Some of the things that I'd like to talk about him first before he comes up here is that he's been a student leader on campus for years. He really helped break ground with the Salmon Bake. He's done amazing things with the powwow, and he's worked really hard on the Chinook Wawa language group. It's a social group here on campus that he'll tell you more about, but let's give a round of applause for Sky.
Maona, na jugi jawine. Hiningara go nashna ja maona, na jugi jawine. Slaham kanwem saga, ja yusul tnak pasmit with ilak kanwem sa. Slush kimidak silakum saga. Kerawa kanjo pinkaraga higa arena. The chago kaba uko changara, pipachunga, shawash tilakum. Weekly ilipna dulu na tai pipa kaba Portland High School. Piwakt, ayak nakamunk slush kanoi ek ukna tikimunk. Students, faculty, staff, and honored guests. It is an honor to be here tonight, sharing a piece of my story for all of you. My name is Sky Hopinka. I'm of the Ho-Chunk and Pechunga Nations. I'm a senior here at Portland State University, majoring in English, and I'm proud to say that this June I'll be graduating and continuing on the path I've chosen to take in filmmaking and Indigenous language revitalization. It is an honor and a privilege to be speaking before all of you this evening to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the groundbreaking of the Native American Student and Community Center. PSU serves nearly 500 Native American, Alaska Native, and Pacific Islander students. Our population makes up roughly 2% of the university's total population. We all represent distinct groups of people coming from tribal communities throughout the lower 48, as well as students from New Zealand, Fiji, Samoa, the Hawaiian Islands, and Alaska. The majority of our students are non-traditional. Many are older, those returning to school after raising children, those who spent years in the workforce, and those, like myself, who are finishing something that we started long ago. We're in a time where unemployment and poverty are running rampant through our communities. We are in a time where opportunity to attain an educational degree can change lives. I started my education at PSU in 2006. Originally, I chose to come here because Portland falls somewhere in the middle between my family in northern Washington and my family in Southern California. But I stayed here because of the community. My experience at PSU has not been the traditional experience. Life happens. There are financial responsibilities that demand immediate attention. And there are the more intangible, the ethereal, the grief of when families become smaller, yet the joy when they begin to grow again. Needless to say, while being here, while being a part of this community, I, like many others, have gone through much change, and I'm grateful for the relationships that I made along the way. In the past few years, the change at the Native Center has been great. It has truly become a home away from home for many of us. 3 student groups, the United Indian Students in Higher Education, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and the Pacific Islander Club are now housed in the building, along with the Healing Feathers Project. This past year, 2 new student-run groups have emerged, the Indigenous Arts and Craft Group, which brings students together to work on regalia and other cultural projects, and the Chinookawawa Social Club. This past summer, with the aid of students, staff, faculty, and community members, Chinookawawa, a local trade language in this region, began to live in the Native Center. I'm proud to be part of the group that worked hard to get this gathering up and running, and that we made it available to all students and community members, Native and non-Native alike. We meet for 2 hours a day, twice a week at the Native Center, in space donated by the Native Center, and for that we are very grateful. I encourage you all to come. As I graduate this June, I will be graduating with my foreign language requirement met in an Indigenous language. To achieve fluency, I use the Wary Keys methodology developed by Evan Gardner, and now the hope is that other students will continue to nurture the group, use the method, and help continue Portland State's efforts to revitalize Native languages. It wouldn't have been possible without the support of many, many people. And without the dedication and support of the Native Center's staff and community, much of where we are now would not have been possible. Now, staff and community, along with the NASCC Advisory Board, are working on other projects to make Native American, Alaska Native, and Pacific Islander student success a top priority. I currently fill the student-at-large position on the NASCC Advisory Board, and for the past year, we've been working on fundraising for the creation of a Native American, Alaska Native, and Pacific Islander scholarship. We have also been raising emergency funds for our students in need, and we've been planning programming for the center fulfills its mission of being a student's home away from home. We plan to celebrate our 10th anniversary of the next year to honor Indigenous student success. This event tonight is the first of 3. This coming fall, we will be hosting another event to raise funds for an endowed scholarship for Indigenous students. It is our hope that you all can participate in some way to help us see our goals realized. Kawekagwa, Pina Gigi, Aski.
Thank you, Sky. I would just like to give another round of applause to Sky and for the amazing work that he's doing and the amazing speech he just gave. Soon on our website, we'll be releasing more student testimony like Sky's. We have 9 testimonies that will be released within the next week. So next I'm going to welcome Robert Miller. He's a member of Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma. He's a Lewis and Clark Law School professor. Miller has been active for many years as a practitioner and teacher in Indian law. He is the Chief Justice in the Court of Appeals for the Grand Ronde Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and sits as a judge for other tribes. Professor Miller graduated from Lewis and Clark in 1991. He is respected author of a well-known book, Native America, Discovered and Conquered, Thomas Jefferson, Lewis and Clark, and Manifest Destiny. And his new release, Reservation Capitalism, Economic Development in Indian Country, Native Americas Yesterday and Today. But before Robert goes on, we're going to have a Pawnee Honor Song by Cornell and his group.
We don't need a microphone. We're going to sing something very special. We have a number of us that come a long way. Actually, all these people here, we just picked up at the airport. We came straight here. Their bags are still in our car. But I do want to share with you, this is important. And I'd like to introduce everybody at the powwow, but right now, because of time, my brother Jimmy Reeder is part of the traditions of the Aloshka. Wichita and the Pawnee are very similar. So Jimmy, you.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to sing this honor song today, honor individuals that are to be honored today. This is a Pawnee honor song, and I am of the Wichita tribe, and Wichitas and Pawnees are linguistically related in the linguistical stock of the Native American languages, as well as the Rickere and the Caddo tribe of Indians. Rickere are in North Dakota, and the Caddo and the Wichita and Pawnee Indians, they are in Oklahoma. So we share songs together, and our languages are close. Even our songs, our ceremonies are they intertwine with one another and related in common ground in that way. We're going to share this song today, and so we will sing this in honor of.
Well, Good evening. As Rachel said, I'm Bob Miller, and I'm delighted to be here. We are all in for a treat. We're lucky to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here today. Walter Echo Hawk is a legend in Indian country, and I'm delighted to know him a bit and have known him for over a decade or so. He was a staff attorney at the Native American Rights Fund for over 35 years, and in that work he represented Indian country on all sorts of issues. He's very well known here in Oregon because he worked for, I think, at least 2 decades representing the Klamath tribe on their water rights issues. He also worked on passing legislation in front of the Congress. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act has Walter's handprints all over that, and he's written extensively on that issue. And he's also worked on Indian religious issue legislation that Congress has passed. He has written 3 books, or is finishing his 3rd book right now. He wrote the award-winning Battlefields and Burial Grounds, and he's here tonight, of course, to speak to us about In the Courts of the Conqueror. So I'm delighted to hear what he has to say, and again, happy that you're here. Please join me in welcoming Walter Echo Hawk.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that introduction. Professor Miller is, of course, a law professor over at Lewis and Clark Law School, and has long been one of my heroes. I've valued his law review articles as well as his writings, his different books that he's put out, and I'm looking forward to reading his new book, Reservation Capitalism. I want to first of all say I should have wore my girdle if I'd have known I was going to be on the big screen here. But I want to thank Jimmy Reeder and my brothers here for rendering that beautiful song this evening. It basically says it's good that we still have this Herushka dance. You know, it's a pretty song from our Pawnee tribe in Oklahoma. I want to begin by thanking the Center, the Native American Center, for bringing me to PSU. It's certainly a great privilege on my part to come and speak in support of the Native students here at PSU and to celebrate their vibrant and important Native American Student and Community Center here on the campus. I want to commend PSU and congratulate PSU, you know, for having this wonderful Native American Center here on the campus. I think it's an asset not only to the university but also to the city of Oregon, as well as all of the Indian tribes in the Pacific Northwest here for providing such a wonderful and vibrant higher education center, you know, for our next generation of tribal leaders. So I know that this is a big asset, and I'm very humbled to be able to help mark this 10th anniversary for that institution. I know that in 1991, my daughter, Amy Echo Hawk, attended PSU along the way towards getting her master's degree, and attended about 5 or 6 universities, and has always said that she got her finest education here at PSU. So I am glad to be here. I thank the board and the staff, Rachel Cushman, Karma Cochran, and Julie Smith, and as well as all of the sponsors for making this evening possible. I thank each and every one of you for being here this evening. I know that you're busy. You could have been doing a lot of other things Friday night here in Portland, but you chose to be here, and I'm very humbled and grateful that you are here. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the tribal elders that are here tonight. What a wonderful audience I have, and I'm glad to see my dear sister Elizabeth Woody as well. Hi, Liz. I am glad to be here in Portland. I consider it, as Professor Miller said, you know, this is sort of my home away from home. I've spent many years litigating here in Oregon on behalf of Indian tribes, and I have a father-in-law that was born at Celilo Falls, and my wife was raised on the Umatilla Reservation, you know, and I have many relatives and in-laws here in Portland and Vancouver, and a lot of wonderful associates, friends, as well as many clients and former clients here in the state of Oregon. So I'm very glad to be here tonight, and I bring you the well wishes from the great state of Oklahoma, where I live right now. This evening, I've been asked to address 3 subjects. The first being my life's work as a native rights attorney. That could be a long subject because I'm pushing 64 years old and have practiced law for 39 years, but I'll not bore you with all of those details. Secondly, I've been asked to talk about my recent book, In the Courts of the Conqueror. And thirdly, to give some observations about indigenous education. And I think after I cover these 3 areas, there's room for questions. I think there's going to be some questions and answer time, and then we'll sell a few books at the back of the room there. I think I brought 40 books. These are among the last of the hardback editions of this particular volume. I think it'll be hard to get a hardcover in that in the future, as they're moving to paperback at this point. So without further ado, let me turn to my first subject, and that is my life's work, I guess, as my legal career as a native rights attorney. And if this were only about me, I would be very reluctant to do that, you know, and not want to talk about that, because we're taught at home, you know, not to bring attention to yourself or try to boast or that sort of thing, you know. But this is not just about me. This is really about a whole generation, or maybe 2 generations of Native peoples, because my legal career just happens to span this tribal sovereignty movement that we have witnessed here in the United States since 1970. And beginning in the late 60s and really gaining steam in the 1970s, and has brought us to the rise of our modern Indian nations that we see today here in Oregon, throughout the Pacific Northwest, and across the country. And historians, my good friend Charles Wilkinson, one of my mentors, has said that this rise of modern Indian nations that we have seen here from this tribal sovereignty movement is really one of the great American social movements in American history that rivals in importance, you know, the civil rights movement or the women's movement, the environmental movement, and a very historically important social movement in our nation. And during this period for the rise of our modern Indian nations, when Native Americans and tribal leaders, you know, worked to reclaim our sovereignty, our heritage, our lands, our pride as Native peoples here in the United States, I had the distinct privilege of being one of the foot soldiers, I guess, in that social movement, along with many, many more people, an entire generation, if you will. And my particular role that I played was as a staff attorney for the Native American Rights Fund. Many of you may know of the Native American Rights Fund, but it is our nation's only national Native interest legal organization. sort of similar to the NAAC Defense Fund, but is staffed primarily by Native attorneys and an all Native American board. It was founded in 1970 and continues on to the current day, headquartered in Boulder, Colorado, with offices in Washington, D.C. and Anchorage, Alaska. But this organization has provided legal representation on some very significant and complex legal issues, facing Indian tribes, since 1970. Having gone to the Supreme Court in probably about 90 cases, and attorneys from that organization representing clients on many of the legislation that was passed by Congress in this modern era of federal Indian law. During that period when I was there, from 1973 through 2008 or 2009, about 38 years, the Great Spirit really did bless me with a very long and a unique legal career. At that time, I was able to represent Indian people across the country on different legal areas, whether they be prison inmates, Indian students, tribal organizations, or Indian tribes, throughout the United States, including up in Alaska as well as Hawaii. And over those years, I've had the privilege of traveling throughout Indian country, some of the most awesome places left, in the American West and the East as well. And I had the very best clients in the entire world, as Native peoples and these Indian tribes during this almost a 40-year span. And during that time, I was able not only to represent the living, but as Bob mentioned, the dead as well in the repatriation movement, to represent my Pawnee tribe, with regard to repatriating some of the dead Pawnees that had been dug up in Nebraska and Kansas and carted away to the museums. We provided legal representation to get laws passed, as well as some litigation in Kansas and Nebraska, and ultimately onto the national level with the passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. So I had the privilege of that time in working with some very powerful traditional religious leaders that were deeply concerned about the well-being of our ancestors, and able to, in some degree, some measure, even provide legal representation, to the spirits of our ancestors in that setting. I was also able, during that time, to represent and work with some of our most profound spiritual leaders of this last generation or two. Some great religious leaders, many of whom are no longer with us today, to represent them in in prison work, to bring the Sweat Lodge and Native religion into the correctional setting. And in fact, the first time I came out here to Oregon was to provide legal representation to the Indian inmates at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. And was very fortunate at that time to met the warden, a man named George Sullivan, who was very quick to see the need to allow the Native inmates to practice their traditional religions while incarcerated. And he became an advocate, actually, of bringing the Sweat Lodge and Native religion into the state penitentiary, and he later served as one of my expert witnesses in other litigation against other prisons. At that time, most of the Indian inmates in the Oregon State Penitentiary were belonged to the Klamath tribe, who had been terminated and had received a lot of termination monies winding up ultimately in the state penitentiary. I was able to represent the Native American Church with regard to the protection of the peyote religion, that old use of that powerful plant of power, that peyote plant, very prevalent in Oklahoma, where I come from. And in a case arising out of Oregon, where we went to the U.S. Supreme Court on 2 occasions in Oregon Unemployment Division versus Smith, where Attorney General Frommeyer was attempting to stamp out and rid the peyote religion from Oregon, saying that the religious use of this peyote plant was in violation of the criminal laws of the state of Oregon, and to grant an exemption for native religious practice would create a law enforcement loophole, I guess, in the drug war at that time. Even though this peyote religion, according to anthropological evidence, is over 10,000 years old, probably the oldest, most continuously practiced indigenous religion in the hemisphere, it has always had a hard time in our country getting the free exercise of religion. That case went to the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, twice. And on the first occasion, the Supreme Court said we had won in the court below, and the Supreme Court kicked it back and said, asked the Oregon Supreme Court, did you really mean to protect this religion? And on remand, the Supreme Court of Oregon said, yes, we did. And so it was then appealed back a second time, in which the Supreme Court handed down a very sweeping opinion that stripped the Native American Church of any First Amendment protection. And it restricted the reach of the First Amendment so narrowly that it endangered or weakened everyone's religious liberty, and it created a religion crisis. And this was in 1990. It prompted all of the other religions to a pilgrimage back to Washington, D.C. to pound down the doors of Congress and try to get Congress to pass a law to protect their religions. And Congress responded by doing so. And it also passed a separate law for this Native American Church to protect the religious use of peyote for religious purposes. So I was able during this time to work in the area of religion, not only in those areas, but protection of sacred sites, litigation as well, which is a very difficult area of the law. And I've won some cases and lost others in that area. Area of water rights, including work here in Oregon for my longtime clients, the Klamath Tribes of Oregon, to quantify and protect their water rights for hunting, fishing, and gathering purposes. The Klamath tribe here in Oregon is currently going through a general stream adjudication being conducted by the state of Oregon. It started way back in 1975. And we just had a 30-day trial on its in-stream flow water rights about a year ago in Salem there. And the court now is starting to hand down these decisions regarding the Klamath tribe's water right claims for how much water does it take to support a fishery, to gather plants, to support the deer and elk herds, to support the migratory waterfowl migrations that come through the area. And thus far, the courts are handing, or the administrative judges here in Oregon are handing down opinions that are awarding all of the claims requested by the tribes to large amounts of water with a time immemorial priority date, recognizing that our animals and plants, need water to survive. We need habitat to survive. And that's a huge step for our courts to take, to beginning to understand the natural world, as well as our indigenous cosmologies, our hunting, fishing, and gathering cosmologies of our tribal cultures that continue to live in our indigenous habitats, and maintain those relationships with the animals and plants, and so I think it's a real healthy and good sign to see our state administrative tribunals to recognize, the needs of the natural world. So I've been able to do a lot of water right litigation also in the Pacific Northwest for the Muckleshoots and the Klamaths, and out in the Great Plains areas for the Kickapoo tribe of Kansas and Northern Cheyenne up in Montana as well. In the area of culture, I was able to work with my sister here, Elizabeth Woody, to help establish the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. And we brought this foundation right here to Oregon to locate it right here in Oregon. And it's our nation's very first national a philanthropy nonprofit foundation that's devoted exclusively to funding our native arts and cultures and to strengthen philanthropy and to strengthen the infrastructure and to support our native artists. And I stepped down from the board a few months ago, but Elizabeth is still with the board, and it's a very wonderful national foundation that I hope all of you can find a way to go visit their offices. They recently moved across the river to Vancouver, Fort Vancouver. Go over there if you can and meet the staff there. So I've been able to work in other areas as well, education and tribal courts and that sort of thing, but it's certainly been a unique legal career that I have enjoyed, and I feel like, we've made great strides during this modern era of federal Indian law or the tribal sovereignty movement. Native people, it seems to me, are small in number, but we have been very blessed by the Great Spirit with good leadership. And among our people, I've just been amazed to work with our Martin Luther Kings, Mahatma Gandhi, and other leaders of that ilk, in this Nelson Mandela, in this among our tribal peoples. We're very fortunate to have strong leaders, not only political leaders, but our spiritual leaders as well, our traditional spiritual leaders. And they have left us much in this generation. They have carried forward and discharged their duties and have passed down to us, a wonderful, wonderful legacy and a wonderful heritage. And this state of Oregon, I think, has sort of been a microcosm of our larger tribal sovereignty movement that we've seen around the nation here in the past, since 1970 down to the present day. During that time, we also witnessed the modern era of federal Indian law, which provided the legal framework for this sovereignty movement. Federal Indian law is defined as that body of federal law which basically pertains to indigenous property rights, political rights, cultural rights, and human rights of Native American people here in the United States. It's derived from treaties, from the U.S. Constitution, from Supreme Court decisions, from acts of Congress, a very vibrant body of federal law. And during the modern era of federal Indian law, scholars in our field say that that started in maybe the late 50s with the Supreme Court decision in U.S. v. Lee. Attorneys were able to coax the courts to apply some of these 19th century foundational principles of the John Marshall court in a modern day setting. And on that basis, to respect our treaty rights and our inherent tribal sovereignty, creating a framework for these nation-building advances that have been witnessed throughout the country. And it seemed to me that from when I became a lawyer in 1973, all the way up until about the middle of 1985, we had a really good winning track record in the federal courts. We just simply couldn't lose a case, it seemed like, during that time frame, you know, which is the modern era. But that began to change in 1985 with the advent of the Rehnquist Court, and then down to the present day with the Roberts Supreme Court. The Supreme Court trend has been on an anti-Indian trend to trim back our hard-won Native American rights before the High Court. And it's the court observers tell us that during this time frame that Indian nations have lost over 80% of their cases that come before the Supreme Court. In some terms, losing as high as 88% of the cases that come before the court. That's a very frightening judicial trend. That statistic means that prison inmates fare better in the Supreme Court than our Indian nations do. And so this is the biggest problem that we have today, you know, as to what to do about this hostile Supreme Court. And it has led many of our legal scholars and worried tribal leaders to ask, is federal Indian law dead? And this state of affairs troubled me greatly as a lifelong practitioner of federal Indian law. And it led me to begin thinking about writing this book that I want to talk about here shortly, to want to explore federal Indian law on a deeper level. And so I started writing this book, In the Courts of the Conqueror, the 10 worst Indian cases ever decided. And it took me 4 years to do that. I want to tell you a little bit about what this book is about. It basically is a unique study of the law. It studies the dark side of the law affecting Native Americans in American legal history. And it attempts to understand the forces at work that have really produced an amazing prevalence of unjust cases by the American courts affecting Native peoples. And the methodology that I used here was simply to pick the 10 very unjust cases. Cases that are still the law today, that have never been overturned and are still relied upon today to decide modern Native issues, and study them, to try to not only read the opinion and understand it, but go behind it to the extent I could to look at the briefs, learn more about the judges and the plaintiffs, the parties to the case, the sign of the times, and just see what I could learn from these study of these really bad cases. And see if I could find any common threads there, any lessons to be learned about justice or injustice, to see whether the dark side of the law could reveal any pathway a pathway towards reforming and strengthening the law, perhaps. And I came up with a number of findings from that exercise. It was 4 years in the making. Ruined my social life and almost my marriage by the time it was done. But my first finding that I discovered was that these are really good stories, that there's these 10 cases or areas that I looked at are very gripping tales about epic encounters between two cultures in American history. Encounters over very vital issues that took place in our courts. These are true stories that are literally etched in the judicial records. There are stories about colonization of America and the colonization of Indian tribes. These true stories are about the harsh impacts of manifest destiny upon Native Americans that were upheld as perfectly legal. Regarding taking the land, how was that done? Taking the land, taking the resources, subjugating the tribes, destroying habitat, destroying culture. How was that done? Was it legal or not? You know, but these are all true stories, and they're very riveting stories that these cases tell us. Short stories, if you will, in American history. Secondly, I concluded that these tales really deserve to be told. They deserve to be told. And so I wrote it in a general fashion for the general reading public, not just for attorneys. But these tales, they show how the West was won in the courts. You know, what role the American courts had in the winning of the West. They reveal, these stories reveal the unjust impacts of colonization on Native peoples in our own land and the efforts of our Native people to overcome injustice. Basically, their struggles, you know, against injustice, you know, that occurred in American history. Struggles that I think really do stir the human heart, illustrating the strong impulse that human beings have to resist, you know, life under unjust conditions. These tales also, from a legal standpoint, also show how the forces of conquest, colonization, racism, doctrines and notions of racism and injustice can be implanted into our legal system. And that helps us to better understand the nature of injustice and justice, it seems to me. That kind of learning or background can affect our moral compass, it seems to me, and perhaps show us the way towards taking steps that we can rectify injustice. So these really are, I think, tales that need to be told not only to our Native people, but non-Native people as well. My third finding was that these stories that are told by these cases are not really about injustice alone, but they're also provide valuable information to us as a society about who we are and what we can be. They provide us, it seems to me, a pathway to a more just culture in the 21st century by strengthening federal Indian law. By peering into the dark side of the law, we can really see what areas in there need to be strengthened and what areas need to be discarded. Fourthly, I learned from looking at these 10 cases that the law really has two sides to it. You know, I think that when most people go to court, American courts, they expect justice out of our legal system. And that's a very reasonable expectation because we have a legal system in America that's intentionally designed to provide justice. It's done through the rules of ethics, the rules of canons of judicial ethics, rules of civil procedure, all designed to achieve a fair trial, to avoid prejudice, to provide an independent court system. And the canons of judicial ethics specifically list justice in our society as one of the goals of our judicial system. So we reasonably expect it from our courts, and we see it most of the time in 99.9% of the cases that are handed down, and you got to bow to the hardworking judges that are tasked with the responsibility of deciding these cases, often very complex and difficult cases. But every once in a while, we'll see a case that's handed down that has a manifestly unjust outcome to it, no matter what age or it's just manifestly unjust. We saw that in the slavery cases before the Civil War, upholding the institution of slavery. We saw it in the Dred Scott decision before the Civil War, where a black slave went to federal court to sue for his freedom and that of his family. And the Supreme Court kicking it out of court, saying, we have no jurisdiction over this. The founding fathers didn't intend to allow blacks to use the the federal courts because they felt they were so racially inferior that they didn't intend to allow them to use the courts. We saw it in the Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision, you know, upholding this separate but equal doctrine. The Korematsu case, you know, for Japanese Americans, upholding the incarceration of an entire race without a hearing of any kind in World War II. And we see it also in these Indian cases that I looked at in this book. So there's a good side and a bad side to the law, you know, that we can see. At its best and in its finest hour, the courts, you know, hand down opinions that really stir the human heart, you know, like Brown v. Board of Education and some of these other decisions that really show the defining role of the courts as a bulwark against the tyranny of the majority, against the vulnerable groups, you know. But we also see these manifestly unjust cases that are handed down. How do we explain that, you know? And so I tried to do that in my book. On federal Indian law, my basic findings was threefold here. I'll just share them with you without having to buy the book. The first is a heavy use of race. If you go to Webster, this isn't rocket science, but just go to Webster's dictionary book and look up the word racism and apply that definition to the language written in these opinions. You will see where they describe racially pejorative descriptions of Indians as heathens and savages, inferior people with inferior religions and cultures. In the very same paragraph where the court decides the decision. Secondly, you will find a heavy use of notions of unfettered colonialism. This doctrine of discovery, doctrines of conquest, plenary power of Congress, of unfettered guardianship. These are all part of the law of colonialism that reigned throughout the world in a 500-year span in colonies around the world to sustain the legal systems in these European colonies around the world, all of Africa, all of the Western Hemisphere, Australia, most of Asia, India. Very common traits in the law of colonialism is deeply embedded in federal Indian law. And then thirdly, I found in these unjust cases that I looked at a heavy use of legal fictions. What is a legal fiction? A legal fiction is not a fact, but it's an assumption of fact. And a lot of these cases in the dark side of the law turn on legal fictions. Courts normally decide a case based upon the facts in evidence. You try a case, you put your evidence on, the court receives that into evidence and then applies the rules of law to the facts in the record to decide the case. That's how it works. But every now and then the court will employ a legal fiction to decide a case, and it's usually for just purposes, as in the case of a constructive contract. If I were in cases of fraud, you know, if I were to steal Elizabeth Woody's money out of fraud and she were to sue me, the court would impose a constructive trust on me, on Elizabeth's property, that I hold your property that I got in fraud for your benefit and have to give it back. Well, there was no trust that was created. It was a legal fiction. And courts usually employ these devices when they want to reach a just result. But the legal fictions that are found in Indian law are employed for unjust results, to reach an unjust result. That is, that the act of discovery by a European operates to transfer Indian title to Indian land to the United States. That ain't a fact, that's a legal fiction. The fact of you can equate discovery of an inhabited country with conquering that country, again, not a fact, but a legal fiction. That Indians are inferior, not a fact, a legal fiction. So there's a whole bunch of them that I look at in my book, and it's sort of amusing to see the great lengths that jurists do go to justify and uphold a manifestly unjust outcome through the use of these legal fictions. So these were the basic findings that I reached in my study of the law. My last chapter in there is about reforming the dark side of the law in the 21st century. And I think that we only need to strengthen federal Indian law and not scrap it, but just simply take a scalpel and cut away the dark side of the law. Can it be done? Yes, I think it can, but it'll take the work of a generation. And I'm very optimistic that it can be done, that we can reform federal Indian law in this generation. I have 5 reasons for that optimism. The first being that the Supreme Court is really rowing against the tide. It wants to whittle away Indian rights, whereas the other 2 branches of the federal government want to support Indian rights through the Indian self-determination policy. It's only the Supreme Court now that is rowing against the tide and out of step with the rest of the government. Secondly, I think our Indian nations are poised now, more so than ever before, to vigorously defend their native rights as Indian peoples. Given this stirring rise and these nation-building advances that we've seen during the sovereignty movement, I think our tribes are alive and well. They are the infrastructure and the political unit, as well as the impetus for reforming and strengthening the law. Thirdly, justice costs money in our society, and we have increased prosperity from our gaming advances, economic development advances, to fund a movement to strengthen the law and inform its contents. Fourth, we have more human resources now in Indian country through the Native American Center here on this campus, and we have Native for professionals in all of the professions. When I went to law school, there was a dozen Native American attorneys in the nation, and now there's something like 2,000 or 3,000. So we have the human resources to mount a campaign to bring the Supreme Court back into line with the rest of the nation here. And my fifth reason is that the world has changed. We're no longer an abject British colony. Most Americans want to and have shedded the mindset of a settler and want to become more native to the place that we all live, you know, our homeland here. There's increased appreciation of Native culture, as seen in the work of Liz Woody and our Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, the National Museum of the American Indian. They all represent an increased appreciation of the beautiful Native heritages and contributions to our society that make it a deep and rich nation like none other. And furthermore, the international community has repudiated colonialism worldwide. You know, it's rejected as an oppressive institution. It's hard on peoples. It's hard on the land. And it was rejected in a UN resolution in 1960. The new order of the day is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that the UN General Assembly approved in the year 2007. This declaration was 20 years in the making within the United Nations, and it lays out a comprehensive set of human rights standards that would be minimum standards for the survival and the dignity and the well-being of the world's indigenous peoples. Has anybody read it? Raise your hand. Let's see. Great. I think people are now just starting to read and contemplate the enormous promise of this landmark document of the United Nations. Back in the year 2007, only 4 nations voted against it: the U.S., Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. 4 of the last remaining hardcore settler states, you know, with a lot of native peoples, voted against it. But since the year 2007, all 4 have reversed their position so that they now endorse this human rights document. The Obama administration doing that in the year 2010. And so this declaration, if you compare these UN standards with federal Indian law, you'll see that we come pretty close to it, probably more so than most nations. And I think we have to thank our core values, our human rights values that are articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. And, but there's many areas where our domestic law and policy falls short of meeting these standards, you know. But though they're not legally binding, they lay out a blueprint. They lay out an agenda, a social and a litigation and a legislative agenda for this next generation. Working together, we can try to elevate federal Indian law so it comports with each and every one of these standards. And I think in doing so, we will evolve into a more just nation, We will perhaps complete the American Revolution by bringing the Native peoples within the ambit of these original core values that all men are just men are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice, and that governments are formed for that very purpose. These are high ideals, you know, that our American people have had their core values, that our nation, the American Revolution was founded on these human right precepts. And at every juncture in American history, every important juncture, the precepts of human rights were upon our lips, you know, and our nation has not always lived up to these ideals. But at each time that we have been detoured, these core values has impelled our peoples to self-correct. And I think that this declaration will help us do that in the case of Native peoples here. And it prompts an opportunity for a national discourse on the nature of indigenous human rights in the United States. So I'm very optimistic. I think that this will be the work of a generation. Indian education here on this campus will play a critical role in bringing forward two ways our tribal leaders of this next generation to meet that challenge, which could be the greatest adventure that Indian country has ever gone on, to reform at long last the dark side of federal Indian law, and non-Indians as well to go along on that journey and to self-correct this nation and put it back on that good path that we all want to be on. I think for Native people, our cultural survival depends on trying to strengthen federal Indian law through this UN declaration. And that's why I think we should embark upon ourselves, you know, and gird ourselves for a social movement of that nature in the 21st century. Education, culturally appropriate education, is necessary to do that for our Native people. We've got barriers out there. We have the highest high school dropout rate in the nation. On the one hand, you know, and we've got all of these 34 tribal colleges and about over 100 BIA schools that are now tribally controlled, but these institutions are not funded to the level that they need to be funded. And in the public school system are still not culturally accountable, I think, a culturally appropriate education for our young students there. But we need to mount these barriers and bring forward and educate culturally grounded Native people in the next generation. So I'd like to end now with some concluding words that I wrote on the nature of justice. And so I'll just read you from my book. About the nature of justice, or some thoughts on it. In every civilization, the law is remarkable and indispensable. In the United States, the law forms a magnificent institution. It's vital to our grand experiment in democracy and always has been. As a man-made construct, it is nevertheless fraught with human frailties, and it sometimes falters. Because fairness in a legal system is vital to every individual, institution, and sector of society, a single miscarriage of justice concerns everyone. When a miscarriage happens, we must pause and somberly diagnose the cause. The outbreak of injustice dampens the human condition. It's spread across the land, places our highest ideals beyond reach. Against that evil, the impulse to resist life under unjust laws is strong. It is seen in the traditions of Thoreau, the wisdom of Gandhi, the words of Martin Luther King Jr., and the litigation of Thurgood Marshall. They followed St. Augustine's maxim that an unjust law is no law at all and made the world a better place. The urge to reform an unjust law resonates in the Western tradition, and I submit that on this side of the great ocean, there is an inalienable right to justice in North America. It emanates from the land, perhaps planted by the Great Spirit to nurture human well-being. Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much. Okay.
You can read the questions. Okay, so now we're going to have advisory board members and student staff come around with note cards. If you have any questions, you see Tamara in the middle. You have Dean and Liz on the side and Barb. If you have any questions, just write it down and then we'll bring them up so that Mr. Echo Hawk can answer them for you. Yeah.
Just as long as they're easy questions. Okay, I'll just go through these. First question, I thought I said no hard questions. It says, what are you doing to help fight the Keystone Pipeline? The Keystone Pipeline, it sounds like folks are familiar with it. I did some representation for the Pawnee tribe on that pipeline from Canada all the way across the Great Plains down to Cushing, Oklahoma. I live 5 miles from Cushing, Oklahoma, and then on down to the Gulf of Mexico and to Texas to bring this tar oil into our nation. And this Keystone, the Pawnee Nation asked me to do some historical research for it to try to identify the impacts of that pipeline on Pawnee cultural sites in our homeland in Nebraska. Thank you. And so we were able to do that, and the pipeline corridor on maps that showed where it would be going through our villages and burial grounds, and then we were able to see exactly where that was coming and what impact that would be. But the trick was to then consult with the State Department. You know, since this is an international project, the action agency under the National Historic Preservation Act is the State Department. The State Department is not used to doing government-to-government consultation with Indian tribes in the U.S. The State Department is used to running roughshod over Native people in other countries. And so they had not the foggiest notion about how to consult with Indian tribes in the Great Plains, you know, and we had to say, no, emails don't count, and all of their notions about what is consultation, we had to dispel them. But I ultimately battled my way into the inner sanctum of the State Department. The officer that was in charge was from China, had never been to our American homeland, and were able to basically show them the cosmology of the Pawnee homeland right in the heart of America, deepest, darkest America, that it would be impacting, you know. And so they did all of these dog legs and jiggled the pipeline here and there, and ultimately President Obama pulled the plug, at least as far as the Nebraska leg of that pipeline is concerned. But this UN declaration says that it has a higher standard for consultation. It says that Native peoples will participate in any decision that affects their interest. And it requires the government to consult with tribes with the goal of getting their free, prior, and informed consent before taking any action that affects their rights. So it's a far cry from this bare level of emails and consultations that the Justice Department thought they could get away with. Next question is, are there only 35 books available tonight? True. Can you provide more details on one case? You can order this book online if you don't get a copy tonight at any of your online bookstores. You can go to walterechohawk.com and I can send you an autographed book if you like as well. The case, the details on one case, well, it's basically I put my own case in there, the Smith decision. This is a Supreme Court decision, you know, where I went to the Supreme Court twice. And most attorneys would be very afraid to put one of their cases in as one of the 10 worst. Attorneys, I say, you didn't put one of my cases in there, did you? And with great relief, find that it's not there. But here's a question. What would you suggest allies to Native people can do to be of most help? I think, as I mentioned, we're needing to mount a mother of all campaigns, a social campaign to effectuate this UN declaration. This UN declaration holds the promise of changing the world, changing the way that the world looks at the surviving indigenous peoples around the world, and changing the way that America looks at Native peoples in our own land. And all Americans of good faith, of goodwill, should join in this great social movement that I am advocating here. Okay, one more, and then I'll sign some books back here. Walter, what do you do to manage the frustration or pain when you read through and digest the injustices against Native peoples? Well, first of all, I was taught by some of my mentors that today are among the giants, I think, in federal Indian law. And I think it's true that if the tribal attorneys of today stand on the shoulders of giants in some of these early first generation Native attorneys, such as the late David Getches, from the dean of the CU Law School, and others, were among those giants, but I learned early on that attorneys don't cry. Never cry. Because I can't think of, and I've told that to some of the younger, especially women attorneys that I've tried to mentor. Don't cry, because it undercuts what's your confidence in your client to see your legal counsel out there crying. So you have to take a warrior stance, take a soldier stance, and be courageous and never falter. I want to thank everyone for being with me tonight. I've thoroughly enjoyed being here. And may the Great Spirit be at your side. Thank you.